Alright, what's up guys? This is Blue TCG here with another Vanguard deck profile. This time for Premium. It's going to be Angel Feather Premium. This deck, or I should say this clan, has been one of my favorite clans ever since it was released in BT06 back in, I believe it was 2012-ish. And unfortunately, they have not had the luxury of being a good clan ever since Premium had begun. In the past, especially in G era, the best thing that Angel Feathers could really do was with Nociel Gize, and unfortunately that deck has faded away from being viable in the current metagame. But today I do have something that will change that, and I will go ahead and begin with the deck profile right now, just to go right in. Let's go ahead and start with the starter and the grade 0. We'll go into the grade 0s, the rest of the grade 0s afterwards. But now we got the starter is Black Curse Muriel, and no, we are not running the V-Series starter, and here's why. This card, when you're able to get it off, basically allows you to go plus from damage zone, and at the end of the turn it allows you to bounce the card that you called from damage zone to hand if you have a Vanguard with rescue ability, which generally when you go into your first stride you will have a Vanguard with rescue ability. So basically this card allows you to, let's say you go into Japhkiel, let's say you go into Zophiel. Zophiel especially is a great card to go into off of Muriel, but you have options like Japhkiel, Zophiel, Muriel, or sorry, not Muriel, Salaphiel. All three of those cards have their effects trigger when called from anywhere. And then not only that, when you get to bounce them back to your hand, that's basically another card that you can use next turn in order to get into your damage checks. So I think Muriel facilitates that really well and is worth running over a V-Series starter, since the payoff for this card when you're allowed to resolve it is just extremely good. And being able to again get that effect of like for example Zophiel allows you to discard a card, add a card from damage on the hand and a damage check, and then you're able to bounce that back to hand at the end of turn because of Muriel's effect. Allows you to use that again next turn, or even use Zophiel as a shield because it is a 10k shield. So again, I think it is worth running this card as a starter over a V-Series starter, just because the payoff is great for the cards that I mentioned before. Alright, so now let's go into the trigger lineup and other grade 0s. We are running 4 Heal Guardians. Again, this deck, or not this deck, but Angel Feather in general is not really good at, they're not particularly good at surviving early game, especially in the current metagame. So I think Heal Guardians are necessary in order to combat the rushdown that most decks can bring when they're going first, especially on their grade 3 turn. So I think, again, basically mandatory to have some Heal Guardians to defend yourself. And not to mention that these are grade 3s as well, so if it comes to it, you can discard these as costs for stride, but generally you want to discard these in order to go into your G guards, which we'll go over those later. But yeah, Heal Guardians in this deck are great, and again, really good utility because Angel Feather is able to get back Heal Guardians from the damage zone if you ever see them there. So 4 Heal Guardians. And now into the critical triggers, we are running 4 Stride Fodder crit and 4 of the generic put into soul, draw a card crit that came in, I believe it was Premium Collection 2020, or Premium Collection 2019, excuse me. This is the 2019, this is the 2021. So basically this is your standard premium critical trigger lineup. We're running the Stride Fodder crit, which is the important one because we want to be able to stride without having to discard our important grade 3s. And then we have the Thundershock Angel, which is the card that when your Vanguard attacks, Generation Break 1, put into the Soulless cost, you draw a card and you give your Vanguard plus 10. It doesn't come up very often, but typically if you end up calling this card from damage zone with something like Gavrail Eden or even Hamiel, then you'll be able to use this effect to get an extra card draw and make more out of your card advantage that you gain from cards that call from damage zone and things like that. So again, these cards are great, and of course the 15k shield and 10k power off the trigger effect is what makes them even better. And then we are running some other critical triggers that are not little, they might not be expected, so I'll go over them in detail together with some of the other triggers that we're running. So we're running 1 copy of Doctoroid Refros. This is pretty much a staple Angel Feather trigger in Premium. And I would be running more of this card if it were allowed, but 1 is all that's allowed, so we're running only 1 of that. And then another interesting one is we're running 1 copy of the Sentinel crit from V-Series, that's Black Spark Munkar. And then we're running 1 copy of Hot Shot Celestial Samyaza, and we're running 1 generic Overtrigger. So we'll go over each of these individually. I feel like it's necessary to explain them in detail. Doctoroid Refros, though, is a little self-explanatory. It is pretty much one of the best effect triggers to ever grace upon the earth for Angel Feathers and Premium. This card is at 1 for very good reason. It allows you to get stuff back from the damage zone to your deck, and then it allows you to go plus in the process by putting the top card's damage zone face up and then draw a card. The reason why this card is effectively plus is it allows you to set up your damage zone like with cards that, you know, let's say you had triggers in your damage zone, which you don't really want most of the time. Then you can get those triggers back into the deck. Not only that, but it allows you to reset your damage zone with cards that are face up when they enter the damage zone. That way you have more space for counterblast and you know, effects that require them, such as Hamiel and even Basasael. So Doctoroid Refros is amazing. The only weakness of this card is that it's GB1, but honestly, I mean, this card doesn't show up too much anyway until you're around GB1, so it's not a huge deal that's GB1. And then we're running one copy of the Sentinel crit. The reason for this is that I had a choice of running this or the draw trigger PG that was in V series, and the reason why I'm choosing this is because I feel like the extra crit is worth it in this deck since we're running Hamiel. We want to be able to threaten extra crits on the Hamiel rather than, you know, the opponent just, you know, looking at the Hamiel and saying, oh, it's only 2 damage, I'll just take it. You know, we don't want that to happen. So I think having the extra crit is better over the draw. Not to mention that I think this deck has enough ways to go plus off of things like Jophiel and some of our stride options as well. So I do think running the Sentinel crit is fine. The trouble with running the Sentinel crit is that is -1 PG in the deck, since that means we have space for only 3 other PGs in the deck. But at the same time, Angel Feather has enough utility and recycling that I think it's still fine to run just 1 copy of the Sentinel crit and have only 3 PGs available. Now, of course, that does mean you have to use your PGs more wisely, but just do keep that in mind if that comes up. And then we're running 1 copy of Samyaza. This can be substituted for anything, to be honest. I think that the main reason why we're running this is just as an extra crit in our slots. You can replace it with a stand trigger if you want, or even a draw trigger. The stand trigger, I think that is a good replacement for this, is LMG Nociel. That's the stand trigger that was printed in BT06 a long time ago, I know. But basically that stand trigger allows you to swap a card from your hand with a card in your damage zone by putting it into the soul. However, I don't think stand triggers are amazing in this deck because we are running Hamiel, which is a lot better with more crits, and plus having that 10k is really important for pushing for huge numbers. But I do think that LMG Nociel, just for its effect alone, is a decent option over Samyaza in this deck. And finally, we're running 1 of the generic Overtrigger, and the reason for this is that I do not like Ultima in this deck anymore. In the past, Ultima was good because, you know, you always had multiple copies of Gavrail Prem in your hand, and you know, you can always threaten Ultima basically after your first stride. But nowadays, especially with the lineup that we're running for the grade 3s, which you'll see later on, we're not really able to go into Ultimate stride as often. Plus, we're a little more defensive focused in the late game, so Ultima is not going to be as it's going to be a little more risky to go into Ultima, especially since our G zone is really important for this deck. I feel like you need to have your G zone available in order to make any threatening plays, both on offense and on defense. So because of that, we decided to just run the Overtrigger instead of Ultima. And the reason for this Overtrigger over the Amartanoa, the Keter Shinshri Overtrigger, is that, again, we're running Hamiel in this deck, and being able to give your Hamiel 100 mil is like a punch in the face of the opponent. Like, what, you can't PG and you have 100 million and it's 3 crit? Wow, I guess I just lose then. So that's why this Overtrigger is great in this deck, I think, over Amartanoa. But Amartanoa, there is an argument for running it because we do have multi-attacks in this deck available technically through cards like Gavrail, Eden, and such. So you can consider running Amartanoa instead if you want those extra drive checks. But I do think that for the sole reason of getting 100 mil on your Hamiel, just to punch your opponent in the face, is, you know, that's a good enough reason to run the generic Overtrigger here. All right, and that's going to do it for the trigger lineup. So let's now go into the grade 1s. We've got, to start off our grade 1 lineup, we've got 4 Zophiel, or not Zophiel, Jophiel, sorry. Getting a little ahead of myself there. So 4 Jophiel. This card is probably the best grade 1 in the deck, especially because it pairs so well. Oh my goodness, it pairs amazingly well with Hamiel. This allows you to get an extra counterblast for the purposes of using all of your cards that need counterblast, such as, of course, I just mentioned Hamiel, and even in Basasael late game, as well as cards like Japhkiel, which needs a counterblast in order to be able to use its skill, and a bunch of other effects that need counterblasts and such. And of course, you'll need an extra counterblast for your stride bonus, but this card does more than give you an extra counterblast. It also gives you more damage in order to block your opponent from getting their heal triggers off. Because you'll usually have more damage than your opponent when you get Jophiel off, that means you'll be able to block their heal triggers. Not only that, but at the end of the turn, you get one card from your damage zone to your hand. So this card becomes plus at the end of your turn. So Jophiel is just an amazing card. It allows you to go into all of your combos, and it allows you to basically block your opponent from heal triggers, which is really the one thing that can hurt Hamiel when they take the damage on Hamiel. So 4 Jophiel is great in this deck. Oh, and one more thing about Jophiel before I move on. It does have a decent first skill when rode upon. So basically, if you ride this as your first grade 1 ride, I do think this card is okay. If you have 2 damage when you ride into your grade 2, let's say you have Japhkiel as your grade 2 that you ride into, then you actually get a really good payoff from it. So you ride into Japhkiel, you use Japhkiel's skill first, counterblast, and add the card from your damage zone to your hand, and then you deal 1 damage. And then you can use Jophiel's skill when rode upon to swap a card from your hand with a card in your damage zone. So that's a decent way to get the most payoff off of Jophiel when you ride it as your grade 1 target. And then another thing you can do with Jophiel, if instead of 2 damage you have only 1 damage, you can't do the combo I just mentioned. But instead, what you can do is ride into any other grade 2 that's not Japhkiel, and you can still get a damage swap, which is decent enough if you don't have Japhkiel available. But yeah, for Jophiel, this is probably the best grade 1 in the deck, and wow, does this card put in work when you have cards like Hamiel in this deck. And then next up, we've got 3 copies of Arakiba. This is just basically the PG. The only reason we're running this PG is because it is a grade 1 PG. We don't really want to run draw triggers because, like basically, my reasoning behind this is that we don't really want to run draw triggers in this deck. We want to run crit triggers, and draw triggers aren't really necessary for Hamiel based decks. So I just decided to run the grade 1 PG. Now you can run any other grade 1 PG over Arakiba. And especially, I don't think Arakiba's, you don't really get much off of Arakiba in this deck, because in this deck, as you'll see later on when we get to the grade 3 lineup, we're not actually running any Vanguards with the rescue ability. So this card's skill, the second skill of this card will not come up ever. And because of that, I think it is okay to run the other grade 1 PG that was printed in GR. I'll go ahead and put up the image for that when I edit this. But yeah, so 3 PGs. And the only reason it's 3 is because we have 1 crit sentinel in the trigger zone, the trigger lineup. Excuse me. So yeah, 3 PGs. Then we have 3 copies of Zophiel. Zophiel is one of your damage checkers, and the reason why we're running 3 copies of it is because it is a hard once per turn. If you haven't already watched my V Premium Gavrail deck profile, I explain why in detail it is necessary to run only 3 copies of the hard once per turn damage checkers, because these can really clog your hand if you see a lot of them, since they're only hard once per turn. And plus, since we're able to call these from damage zone anyway, we only really need to see 1 at a time in our rotation per turn in order for them to have a lot of payoff. So 3 copies of Zophiel is pretty good. And not to mention, this card as a grade 1 red target is not bad going second. It allows you to draw an extra card and makes your opponent think about whether they should really guard this or take it, because allowing you an extra card draw going second can really be useful, especially when they start rushing you down once they get to grade 3. So 3 copies of Zophiel. And of course, as mentioned earlier, Zophiel is a great target off of Muriel's skill, because you do get to bounce at the end of the turn, and that's a lot of payoff because it is a 10k shield. Plus, you get to use that hard once per turn skill again the next turn. All right, and now for our utility grade 1s, we've got 2 copies of Battle Cupid Nociel and 1 copy of Black Call Nakir. So the reason why these are our utility grade 1s is Nociel is used for basically using our damage zone as another way of getting cards that you need during your opponent's turn, and also being a way of triggering your OG Gavrail's GB2, which allows you to get plus 2,000 to your front row when you put a card in your damage zone. And we'll go over that later. But basically, Nociel is an amazing utility card on your opponent's turn. It allows you to really use your damage zone as a resource to its maximum potential, and allows you to get any card that you haven't been able to get on your previous turn into your hand on your opponent's turn. And then we have 1 copy of Black Call Nakir, which is mainly in the deck for searching out the V-Series or the OG Gavrail if you don't have either one of them in the hand, but you do have Hamiel in the hand. Basically, it allows you to decide which one you really need in your hand at the moment, if you already have a grade 3 in your hand. And if you happen to have both in your hand, or you don't really need either of them because you have a way to play on your grade 3 or first stride turn already, then you can just use this card as a stride fodder for whatever strides you're going into. And I feel like this card can be run at 2 copies if you feel like that's better, if you feel more comfortable with that. But I do like 2 copies of Battle Cupid Nociel over the 2 copies of Nakir, just because Battle Cupid Nociel is useful throughout the whole game, and its usefulness really shoots up going into the late game, whereas Nakir's usefulness kind of slows down late game in my opinion. So these ratios are kind of reflective of that. But yeah, that's going to do it for the grade 1 lineup. All right, so now to the grade 2s. We've got 4 copies of Black Aculeus Japhkiel. Probably the best grade 2, the best staple grade 2, I should say, that Angel Feather has available in V Premium for sure. And Premium, it is definitely a close one. But this card is amazing in terms of its utility. It allows you to get cards from your damage zone into your hand right away, and then it does a damage check, which also helps you get closer to that Hamiel, getting to like a bunch of power and a bunch of crit. Not to mention that this card is inherently plus, because it allows you to get a card from your damage zone to your hand just like that, as long as you have a counterblast available. So this card is especially good in this deck because all the cards that we're running that allow you to damage check, like Japhkiel, like Zophiel, and also like Salaphiel, they all work when placed from anywhere. It does not matter from where they're placed, as long as they're placed on Vanguard or Rearguard Circle. Now, of course, the weakness of all of these cards is that they're hard once per turn, but generally speaking, Japhkiel is really, you just really badly want to see it, so that's why we're still running 4 copies of it. And also, it is inherent +1, so it's not bad at all to see it, even though it's hard once per turn. 4 copies of her, and then we're going to be running 3 copies of Black Mapping Salaphiel. Salaphiel is in the deck mainly because she's another damage checker, just another name for those cards that damage check since they're all hard once per turn. But not only that, but also she's one of the few cards that damage checks in this deck that is an effective countercharge. We lost a lot of those going into V because a lot of the cards in V require a counterblast in order to use their ability in the first place. And even though you can add the same card that you counterblasted with cards like Japhkiel, they don't inherently countercharge, unlike Salaphiel. Salaphiel, however, inherently countercharges because in order to use that skill, you just need a Soul Blast. And there's not that many Soul Blasts that we have in this deck. So usually you have the Soul Blast available in order to use her skill, which is great. And then another thing that's great about her is that she gets 10k when you've put a card in your damage zone during your turn, which is really, really easy to pull off. Like that you're gonna be putting a card in your damage zone pretty much every turn. So she becomes an easy beat stick for your front row attackers if you don't have a Hamiel on the rearguard circle. So Salaphiel is great, but again, 3 copies because she is a hard once per turn. So that's that. And then we've got our utility grade 2s. We're going to present them together just to keep things a little brief. We've got 3 copies of Love Machine Gun Nociel and 2 copies of Clearview Angel. So both of these cards, although they're utility cards, although they're kind of techish cards, they perform very well in this deck in terms of just giving you a little bit of more like utility, more recursion, more recycling, making more out of your damage zone and more out of your drop zone, things that you need to recover and things like that. So let's go over them each individually. We've got Love Machine Gun Nociel. Basically, when it's placed on Rearguard Circle from anywhere, again, this card was printed a long time ago. It was first printed in BT06, so it has some old school wording. It says choose an Angel Feather from your hand and put it into your damage zone. But the good thing is, when it's placed from anywhere, this card will work as long as it's placed on Rearguard Circle. And there's no hard once per turn either. So you pay the cost. If you do, you choose a card from your damage zone and put it into your hand. So you swap. Now, the sad thing about this card, however, is that it does say choose an Angel Feather. So weirdly enough, this card had good enough wording to protect itself from the exploit that involved Protect 1 markers, where you can put the Protect 1 marker in your damage zone, and then it'll immediately disappear, and then you still get to add a card from damage zone to hand because the Protect marker cannot go in the damage zone. So that's like an effective way to heal cards from your damage zone. But this card does not allow that because it does say choose an Angel Feather. So sadly, you do have to swap a proper Angel Feather card. But that aside, this card is still amazing because it effect triggers when placed from anywhere. It allows our stride bonus on OG Gavrail to really shine. It allows for Gavrail Eden's skill to really shine when it calls cards from damage zone, as well as Hamiel's skill because that also calls cards from damage zone. You kind of see the theme here where we have all these cards that can call from damage zone because we have cards like Nociel, we have cards like Salaphiel, we have cards like Japhkiel, which all work when placed from anywhere. So we're just making use of that to the most we can because it allows us to go plus while still not using cards from hand. And we're still able to get a bunch of trigger checks as well, a lot more utility with swapping since we are able to go through all those cards from our damage zone and such. And then we have Clearview Angel. Now, Clearview Angel is a little bit of a niche card. It was first released, I believe, a while back in one of the early sets in V. And this card is not really seen play in most competitive V decks, neither in V Premium nor in Premium. And I can see why, of course. Its skill is, let's go ahead and read its skill quickly. I'll bring it closer. When placed from the hand, you put a card from your drop zone into your damage zone face down, and then you call a face-up card from your damage zone to rearguard circle. So, of course, reading its skill, there's a good reason why it wasn't being played early in V, and that is because a lot of the early Angel Feather cards in V only worked when placed from hand, and Clearview Angel, of course, only calls from face-up damage zone. So Clearview Angel just wasn't really that useful. The best way it was useful was in getting back cards from your drop zone to your damage zone. But nowadays, there's a lot better ways of doing that than with Clearview Angel. You have cards like Scaling Angel, which allows you to put any normal unit in your drop zone into your damage zone. And then, of course, you put a card from your damage zone into your soul. And then you also have cards like Wild Shot Celestial Raguel, which allows you to call any normal unit from your drop zone to your rearguard circle at the cost of a counterblast. So, of course, there's, with those two cards in mind, you can probably see why Clearview Angel is a little niche. However, in this deck, it is amazing because it functions doubly in two ways. Here are the following ways. In one way, it allows you to get any card from your drop zone into your damage zone, any card. It doesn't matter whether it's a trigger unit or a normal unit. Any card from your drop zone to your damage zone. Of course, it has to go face down, but when you really think about it, it doesn't matter too much that it has to go face down because you have cards like Refros, you have cards like Gavrail Eden, which can call from the damage zone without regard to whether they're face down or face up. And then, of course, Refros allows you to return any card from your damage zone to your deck, which it doesn't matter whether it's face down or face up. And then the second part that allows Clearview to be really good in this deck is that it calls a face-up card from damage zone to rearguard circle, which in this deck is amazing because all the cards that we're running can still trigger their effects when they're called from damage zone. So again, Clearview Angel just really good for this deck. And the reason why it's only at 2 copies in this deck is that we're not really looking for seeing this card. We're not really trying to see this card super often. It's mostly just like for, getting back those resources that we've already expended from the drop zone to the damage zone. Things like, if you've used the Jophiel already, you can get Jophiel back in the damage zone. And then later on, let's say, like a good combo, actually, we can just show this combo right now. Is let's say you have the Clearviews in hand. You call one of the Clearviews. Let me actually get a Jophiel here. So let's say Jophiel's in the drop zone because you already used it. You call the Clearview from your hand. You put the Jophiel into your damage zone. Let's say you have Nociel face up in your damage zone already. Then you're going to call Nociel. All right, then let's say these are in the hand. Doesn't really matter what's in your hand, but basically, when Nociel's placed, you're gonna swap this with the Jophiel with the Jophiel that's in your damage zone because you just put it from your drop zone to your damage zone, and then you can use Jophiel skill right away because you put it into your hand. You're gonna counterblast, and then you're gonna get a card from your top of your deck into your damage zone after you bind Jophiel. So that's a really good combo, and it kind of goes to show why Clearview is really good in this deck. It's just really synergistic with all the cards that we have in this deck that still trigger their abilities no matter from where they're called. And the fact that it gets cards back from drop zone is just terrific for cards like Jophiel and other things that we need to get back from the drop zone if necessary. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, you can still get a trigger unit back as well if you really want to. So a great card, and I do think that it's underrated for Angel Feathers, at least in this deck. Of course, in the past, it was not being run for good reason, but I think in this deck it's pretty good. All right, so now onto the grade 3s. We've got, unsurprisingly, 4 copies of Hamiel. This is probably still one of the best rear guards that Angel Feather has access to in Premium. This card allows your early game to be really threatening and also allows your late game to be threatening. Because not only is this card a finisher, but it's also another one of your damage checkers that provides utility to your deck in the early game. Let's go ahead and read its skill. When placed, if you have Vanguard with black in its name, you counterblast 1 and call a card from damage under rearguard circle, and then you deal your Vanguard 1 damage. So, of course, that ability is hard once per turn, but that does not really stop us from running 4 copies of Hamiel because Hamiel's the real selling point of Hamiel is that second ability where we get that guard restrict. It doesn't allow the opponent to use PGs from hand when they have to guard against this. So, I think this card is really, at least when they guard from hand. Excuse me. So this card is really amazing. This card is just deserves to be built around in terms of Angel Feathers, both in V Premium and Premium. Now, sadly, of course, this card is banned in V Premium, but we're going to try to abuse this card the best we can in Premium while it's still allowed to. So, 4 copies of Hamiel. And one more thing about Hamiel before I move on. This card is a great thing to leave in the damage zone because you can call her off of your stride bonus, which we'll get to in a bit. But basically, when you call her off the stride bonus, she's going to get plus 2,000 power, which allows her to hit over Force Clans, which have a base power of 13,000. So that's actually like really important. It makes a huge difference. So seeing this card in your damage zone is actually a really good thing because we have plenty of ways to call her from the damage zone, and it allows her to still be effective in that regard. So 4 Hamiel, and then to round off the main deck, we've got 2 copies of OG Gavrail and 2 copies of V-Series Gavrail. So the only reason why we're running 2 copies of each is because they both have the same name, and that means that we could only run 4 copies cumulatively. So sadly, we do have to see only 2 copies of each of them at most if we're trying to run both of them together. But the reason why we're running, Black Shiver Gavrail, the OG Gavrail, instead of running Gavrail Prim, is that I think Gavrail Prim has actually fallen off a little bit, solely due to the fact that she does not call from damage zone. I think the ability to call from damage zone actually makes OG Gavrail a lot more valuable nowadays. Not to mention that second ability, which is actually the main reason why I wanted to make this card work. I really wanted to make this card work because that second ability is straight up phenomenal. Let's go ahead and read it briefly. So it's a Generation Break 2. When your card is put into your damage zone and then pause, until end of turn, this unit gets continuous Vanguard Circle. All of your units in your front row get plus 2,000 power. Wow, phenomenal. The reason why is that we have plenty of ways to get new cards into our damage zone on our opponent's turn by means of Battle Cupid Nociel, the grade 1 that swaps when it's called on Guardian Circle, as well as cards like Muriel, which is in our G zone. So again, we have plenty of ways to make use of that and abuse that on our opponent's turn. Not to mention that we're already going to be at GB2 after our first stride, usually, which is Gavrail Eden. So this card is amazing on our opponent's turn. Not to mention on our turn, we do have the option of not striding up and deciding to make use of this. However, I don't think that's usually the best play. Usually striding is better than staying on this to get the Generation Break skill that I just mentioned on your own turn. Generally, that's really good on your opponent's turn, but on our own turn, the stride options that we have are a little better, so just do keep that in mind. Not to mention, of course, that the stride bonus allows you to call a card from damage zone at the cost of counter blast 1. After you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, you can put one of them face up in your damage zone. And the nice thing about that as well is that, that ability is +1. So it allows you to basically not have to commit resources from hand in order to get cards that you want onto the field. And we have plenty of ways to go plus from there. We have cards like Hamiel, which allows you to call another card from damage zone. We have cards like Zophiel, which allows you to get a card from damage zone to hand, And then we have cards like Japhkiel, which allows you to get another card from damage zone to hand, etc., etc. The possibilities are endless with the stride bonus, and I think OG Gavrail is amazing in this deck, so definitely deserves to be run at 2 copies in this deck. And then we got 2 copies of V-Series Gavrail for our grade 3 gaming. This is generally the card you want to go into when you're going first, just so that you can get some pressure on with her combined with Hamiel. That way, also, you force your opponent to guard with cards out of hand if they don't want to be put at lots of damage early on. And then also the fact that she is a card that gives you protect markers, allows you to get early protect gifts, which can help with generating PGs. Which of course, we're only running 3 PGs in the main deck, so having that extra protect marker as a PG is really good, and it allows us to cover the holes that would otherwise be present in the current deck that we're building. So yeah, we got our main deck all done. So now let's go ahead and explain the G zone quickly. So to start off the G zone, we've got 4 copies of Fanatic, Seraph, Gavrail, Eden. Gavrail Eden is your go-to first stride. She's still in the past, I think early on in Premium, before cards like Hamiel and stuff were released, I don't think she was too good, but I think nowadays she's definitely very good as a first stride, especially since her second ability has become more useful, since we're able to call from damage zone during the battle phase and still get those effects off with the cards that work when they're placed from anywhere, as long as, of course, you haven't used them during that turn for the cards to which that applies, like the hard ones per turns. So let's go ahead and also understand that her first skill is a Soul Blast 1 Persona flip. So Because of that, it allows you to get an effective counter charge similar to Salaphiel, which is really important also for getting face-up cards in your G-zone. So don't forget to make use of Gavrail Eden's skill, both her skills where applicable. And then last thing to mention about Gavrail Eden before I move on is that she is our stride that has the rescue ability right off the bat. You don't need to do any, extra work to get rescue ability on her, which means that she is our go-to way of making Muriel's skill get the second effect off, which is allows us to bounce the card that we called from Damage Zone with Muriel. So just do keep that in mind when you go into Gavrail Eden, that you do have the Muriel play available when you go into her. So 4 copies of Gavrail Eden. And then next up, we've got 2 copies of Black Seraph Gavrail. This is like the OG Gavrail stride. Now, the interesting thing about Black Seraph Gavrail is that she does not have rescue until you use her persona, counterblast persona flip. So just do keep that in mind. But also at the same time, I do think this card is still worth running, because there are cases where you want to go into this and get some extra rescue checks during the battle phase, which can power up or give the crits to Hamiel if you didn't already see them during the main phase. Because sometimes you do whiff during the main phase, so getting some extra rescue checks during the battle phase is pretty nice. On top of course, the drive checks that you get when you go into your stride. So 2 copies of Black Seraph Gavrail. And then next up, we've got 2 copies of Holy Seraph Basasael. This is the card that we got in Premium Collection 2020. Now, I don't know if Basasael has been honestly too great. It's good for the grind game, but this deck honestly has the risk of decking out by that stage of the game. So typically I do not, make too much use of her first skill. Her first skill, of course, it's always good for, giving you more of a comfort zone. At the same time, though, I've never gone to the point where 8 damage would matter. 8 damage to lose would matter, rather. Usually by that point, I'm close to decking out. So Basasael's main purpose in this deck is mainly for that guard restrict, that counterblast 4, to require your opponent to guard with the same number of cards as the number of cards in your damage zone. That's devastating, especially when it's really late into the game and you've got your Hamiels locked and loaded. That can be really brutal for your opponent to deal with. Now, of course, this can be circumvented by G Guardians because they don't call from hand, and other means of not guarding from hand, such as guarding from soul or intercepting, etc. Do keep that in mind. But generally speaking, Basasael's a good late game finisher. If you do keep in mind that you do need to save up your counterblast, because counterblast 4 is pretty expensive. And then next up, we've got, to round off the G units, at least the strides, we've got 2 copies of Raphael and 1 copy of Raphael Mitra. So these cards I almost never go into. Usually when you go into these, the opponent must have rushed you down a bunch where you'd have to heal cards as your only play. Healing cards in this new Angel Feather build is not as good as it sounds, especially for Raphael Mitra, because you have to discard a bunch from your hand, and you also have to have 3 counterblast. So unfortunately, I do not usually go into these strides, but they're there as an insurance, just in case we do get rushed down. Typically, your best option to heal yourself off is Raphael. Raphael will be better to go into typically, because she does not cost any counterblast, and also she does not require any discarding from hand. All she requires is Generation Break 2, which is pretty easy to fulfill by G-guarding or by just going into your first stride of Gavrail Eden. So just do keep in mind that Raphael is probably your best bet by healing a single card. It's usually better to heal a single card than to discard 2 and heal 2 cards. So just do keep that in mind. But we've got the Raphaels. And then finally, for the G-Guardians, we've got 1 copy of Black Seraph Elilith, 1 copy of Holy Seraph Parashell, and 3 copies of Holy Seraph Suriel. So these are pretty much the best G-Guardians that pair with the OG Gavrail that we're running. Keep in mind that OG Gavrail is the Vanguard that we'll usually have when we go into these G-Guardians. And because of that, Suriel is your go-to G-Guardian, because she allows you to get the extra 2k power to your front row that the auto, of course, thanks to the auto ability of OG Gavrail. And the fact that she looks at the top card of the deck before doing the rescue check means that you will be able to get a chance to see if you hit a trigger. And of course, if you don't see a trigger off the top of the deck, then just put it at the bottom and hope that the next card is a trigger. That way you give yourself an extra defensive boost on your opponent's turn. And then of course, also by putting a new card in your damage zone with Suriel, it means that you have another card face up in your damage zone. which means that you can also, sorry, not another card face up. That's not what I intended to emphasize. I intended to emphasize the fact that you see a new card in your damage zone, which means that that's a new card to potentially swap into by means of Battle Cupid Nociel. So do keep that in mind that Muriel's usually your go-to G Guardian. But Elilith and PowerShell are also great G Guardians for their respective situations. If you find yourself having a lot of face down damage when your opponent's Vanguard attacks, then PowerShell is a great G Guardian to go into. Otherwise, Elilith is a great G Guardian to go into when you have a lot of face-up cards in your damage zone. As long as, of course, you have another G Guardian still available to turn face up for the cost, as well as another card in your soul to Soul Blast. And all right, that's going to do it for the deck profile. Again, you know, Angel Feathers kind of struggle in Premium, in my opinion, right now. But I think with this deck, you have a pretty solid build in order to make use of cards like Hamiel and OG Gavrail to, you know, pack in the most offensive power by the means of the crits, as well as get the most defensive power on the opponent's turn by means of OG Gavrail's skill. All right, so that's going to do it for the deck profile. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deck profile, please consider leaving a like, comment, and please consider subscribing as well. It really helps. And with that, I hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.